This is surveys for anyone that has lost a loved one here on the island and is registering a death at one of the registries.
Okay. And what's the driving force behind the survey?
Well, the survey really came about because we want to understand what's going on the entire island. I mean, we can know what's happening with our patients at hospice, but we really wanted to get a good understanding of what the experience is for everyone here on the island.
And have you done anything like this before, or is this the first time trying this out?
This is the very first. Okay. So this is at a pilot stage.
Right, okay.
Yes.
And so why now? Was there anything in particular that prompted you to create a survey now?
I think we launched our new strategy last year, Rhian, around much more than a building, and we knew that there were people out there who weren't being referred for hospice care, and we couldn't understand the reasons why that. We also know that when people are referred for hospice care, that there's a feeling of confidence, there's a feeling that they're being cared for, they tell us their shoulders relax, that they just feel that life is just so much better because they're not having to carry the burden of this alone as a family. And so when hospice get involved with their care, this is what they're reporting to us. But our much more than a building strategy, if you like, really said we want to do what matters to people. And so once we started chatting to people about their experience, and that informed our strategy, then we realised that there's 34% of people who might benefit from hospice care on the island are not being referred for hospice care. And then we start to look at what's the data for the numbers who might need hospice care in the future. We know that we have to work in a different way. So we have to think about how we find out everyone's experience of end-of-life care on the island so that we can support other services to start to work in the way that hospice works. They'll feel the hospice philosophy coming through in the way that they interact with other individuals and other professionals or other volunteers or other agencies. And because we know that hospice, and when I launched that strategy, we said hospice can't do this alone. We have to work in partnerships. So the 3 commitments were finding out what people want, keeping things simple, and working in partnership. But people can only really partner with us if we're able to share all that expertise, and we only know what people really want if we find out right across the island, and it's not just people who have that referral to hospice. So that's really the driving force behind this.
And you talk about, I know we mentioned this just before, but you talk about finding out what people want, and particularly behind the survey is improving the services that you can offer people on the island. Is there any particular inklings you have of areas that you think might need improving and you want confirmation from people, or is this coming in with a completely clean slate?
Go on.
Well, we have some inklings. We have some inklings of what we might be doing, but this was really find out from what people are telling us. I think we know that communication is an issue at the end of life, for example, based on our needs assessment that we've been working on at hospice. But we really don't know, and that's the reason for doing this.
And it's very much about finding out what the people who experience the death of their loved one, what their personal experience is, because we see things quite often from the perspective of the professionals, and the care might be delivered perfectly from our perspective, but it's how do the relatives and family of the loved one, how do they experience that? And it might be very simple things that could be overlooked, as Giovanna said, communication, how they feel that they have been treated by the professionals, how they feel their loved one was treated. So it could be things that wouldn't necessarily be on our radar all the time when we're focused on the more clinical issues. So really we want to inject the perspective of the family, relatives, carers and friends of the person who died, what their perspective is.
I mean, we're learning from the public all the time, and people who use our services, but in hospice we have what we've got is a small, simple service around the relatives support service. And it was our colleagues in the DHSC said we really don't have a good experience for people who've lost someone in hospital, who come in to be signposted how to register a death, how to plan a funeral, how to get the support and do all the things and the practical stuff that they need to do at that time. And they were going to what was not the best environment in a room near the morgue in the hospital. So we've, and it was, this is Jake Watson room that we have. It was the mother of a 15-year-old who sadly died. Realised that there was no facility that's got a nice, or as nice can be, an environment when you're trying to give bad news, support people who've just been bereaved, etc. So it is small, simple measures that seem to be making all the difference to people. And so we've set up, they just asked, would you have a facility at hospice? So we set aside a room, we shared that room with people. The chaps from the morgue come over and they meet with people on an appointments basis there, and it's in a nice environment where people are empathetic to the cause. And so, but that was very easy for us to set up. We'd just never been asked before. And so therefore, families, it's about, I remember somebody saying to me once, I really don't want psychological counselling at the moment. I want to look after my mum. I want her to stay at home. But really, I just need practical support, my neighbours, and I remember my own auntie dying at home, and the neighbours took the sheets away and washed them, and they brought in sandwiches and soup and practical stuff so that we could support someone to stay at home. Because hospice are going to support you, and other professionals would support you to get your pain relief that you want, other symptom burdens relieved. But it's how do people experience that and live around this process of looking after a loved one at home? Or how do they experience it in hospital settings where everybody seems so busy? How do we support people to have that hospice philosophy of care that just slows everything down a wee bit, calms it down, takes kind of confidence to the situation that you can really deal with this because we're here to support you and help you. And so it's about everybody, where possible, having that type of experience, and other professionals, care agencies, volunteers and workers. But we'll only know that when people tell us. And our strategy was based on what people told us, because Giovanna and Sarah and the team went out and asked, huge numbers of people, what does hospice care mean to you? So our strategy is evidence-based. What we want to do is the services that we help support others to give across the island and our own teams to be evidence-based, based upon what people tell us is important to them. And we usually find, and it's the wee things. We talked to you the other week about compassionate communities, and we know we can put a WhatsApp out, and within half an hour people can be galvanised to go and care for people and support them at home. And it might be what they're worrying about. Nobody can walk the dog. It's stuff like that. It usually is the small stuff, isn't it? And it's about those things, but that's the things people are telling us about, isn't it? That's it's things that we kind of and that, and then some people are staying in hospice for long times, some are for short times. But since we've moved to Southlands, because we're looking, we're having a bit of a refurbishment going on at hospice, 50% more people are dying in home settings. And then historically, they ticked the box to say, I would really prefer to stay at home. And we're finding out now through this survey, what was the experience of staying at home? What's the experience of dying in hospital? What's the experience of dying in hospice? And it's not one versus the other versus the other. It's just how do we garner all these thoughts together, all these experiences, and go, right, this is what people tell us they want. This is how we need to respond collectively to make that happen, isn't it?
Because these small things stay with people for the rest of their lives. And as Anne says, those small things really mount up to the whole experience, either being as pleasant as it could be, or as being, unfortunately, a bad experience.
I remember when I was a wee bit concerned, when I lived in Cardiff, and this is what happens. People live off the island and they're worried about their loved ones. I lived in Cardiff and my mum was up near Glasgow, and I remember travelling away up to see my mum at the end of her life, and it was kind of something always lives with me, and I don't forget, I'm a daughter in that situation. I'm not really the professional. Something lives with me because everybody advocates for their relatives' corner, don't they really? But my auntie said to me, I've never seen anybody have such a peaceful death, Anne. And your mum, she says, we all remember that. It was so peaceful. And if we can achieve that for people, and you can't, some people die in traumatic circumstances, some people die in, through victims of violence, road traffic accidents, etc., etc. But where we know someone is at the end of their life and we can organise things around them, it should be that the memory every time for the family who live on, as Dame Cicely Saunders did say, founder of the hospice, the modern hospice movement, said, the memory of how someone dies lives on in those who live on. Those who remain. So it's about that, isn't it? It reduces mental health. There's not so much pathological bereavement and grief going on, where people have got extreme symptoms of grief and bereavement around distress and anxiety and insomnia and all these things that stop you getting on with your life. And natural grieving, if you've gone through that process for yourself and you don't have these horrendous memories, because we need to have people talking that it's okay. This is a life experience, it's a social experience, and it can be okay.
You mentioned a lot about you mentioned communication a lot throughout what you were saying, and I was going to ask, well, it doesn't sound like you've had any trouble communicating with people and finding out that the little things are what people want, but because the death of a loved one in any circumstance is a very emotional and an upsetting thing, is there a risk of, with a survey, people not wanting to talk, like rather wanting the best for other people but not feeling emotionally like they want to come forward and speak?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why the survey is completely voluntary, and that will be emphasized when it's offered. And it is, like you said, it won't benefit the person, but it could benefit the rest of the community. So that's an act of altruism, I suppose.